New rules in China are adding rigor while fueling the country's gene and cell therapy engine. We'll have a look at the new rules, which take effect in May, on this week's BioCentury This Week podcast. Plus, 2026 catalysts for the biotech industry. This week, BioCentury kicks off its annual look at the milestones that will drive biotech in the year ahead. We'll be starting with Neuro, plus a couple of gems from our emerging company profile series. We'll take a look at Elcodonia, an Argo Bio-founded French biotech, which is investigating a potentially first-in-class intracellular target to treat neuropsychiatric disorders, starting with treatment-resistant depression. And Bexorg, a Yale spinout that is developing a platform to test drugs in donated whole human brains that remain molecularly active. It's an approach that the company believes could transform CNS drug discovery. I'm Jeff Cranmer, host of the BioCentury This Week podcast, and joining me today are my colleagues
Steve Usden, Washington editor.
Selena Koch, executive editor.
And Danielle Golovin, senior biopharma analyst.
Okay, well, we've been telling you recently about our East-West Summit, which will be in March in Seoul, Korea. Returning for its 26th year in May is BioEquity Europe. This is BioCentury's flagship conference, sells out every year. So now is your chance to take advantage of early bird rates, which end on Friday. BioEquity Europe is where CEOs and investors gather to network, partner, and debate critical issues facing the biotech industry. We also have a podcast fun run, which our colleague Josh Berlin is always plugging. I don't know if Josh has ever done the fun run, and nor do I think running is very fun. But nonetheless.
And is the podcast interviewing people while they're running?
You know, we'd have to get probably Steven Hansen to host that episode because I do not think I can keep up with some of the folks in industry who are always out cycling and running. My speed's more elbow on the bar and asking people about the cool things they're doing with their technologies. I don't know, Steve, would you be up for hosting that one?
If I can ride a bike, yeah. I'll ride a bike alongside them jogging and running, yeah.
All joking aside, take BioCentury with you on the go. Listen to the podcast while you're out for a run, a ride, or a walk in the hills, which is my preferred type of exercise. And look out for signups for the BioCentury fun runs at BioEquity Europe. All right, Steve, you've been talking to a few folks about these new rules that China is introducing around gene and cell therapy, investigator-initiated trials, I believe. What did you learn?
Here's the most important part of it. For the first time, Chinese medical centers are going to be allowed to charge for investigational therapies, cell and gene therapies, that have been tested in an IIT, an investigator-initiated trial. There are limits around it, but in general, I think that this is going to fuel an acceleration in the rate of biomedical innovation. It's going to lead to the development of more gene and cell therapies. It's going to generate data, that proof of concept data, that will be useful for the traditional approvals in China and also in de-risking acquisitions of assets from China around the world.
What are some of the parameters around these new rules?
So one, they've limited the number of hospitals or the type of hospitals that will be able to do investigator-initiated trials. They're going to be Class A tertiary hospitals. That's a nomenclature in China. That's about 1,700 hospitals. They're mostly large academic medical centers. After an IIT has been completed, the medical center will be able to apply to national authorities for permission to translate that therapy into routine use in their medical center and to charge for it. They won't be able to use it in other medical centers. It'll be limited to that one medical center, but they'll be able to use it in routine care and, as I said, to be able to charge for it.
So they apply for that. So it's not the same thing as an NMPA approval, but there is an application process. So how are they deeming the ITT positive enough?
That is something that we don't know the answer to. Okay, I spoke with a half a dozen experts, CROs and companies that are developing therapies in China, and none of them know what the criteria will be for deeming that a therapy can be transferred from the status of an investigational therapy that can't be charged for, because in China, you can't charge patients, you can't charge anyone for a therapy that's given in a trial. Nobody knows what the criteria is going to be to go from that to something that's considered ready for routine use and that can be charged for. The assumption of the people that I spoke with is that, there'll be an expectation that the medical centers will demonstrate statistically significant safety and efficacy, but we really don't know. Obviously, the trials are going to be smaller in scale than the ones that are traditionally used for approval by the NMPA. That's the Chinese version of the FDA.
I'm also curious about throughput. So they've narrowed the number of hospitals that can do these, right? So now that it's focused on kind of specialized centers, which is good for the robustness, the quality, and all of that. But are IITs going to be less common? So like the resources available to do your de-risk, if you want to have your thing de-risk in an IIT, is there going to be a longer line for that? Do you have any sense?
I don't think so. I think the people that I spoke with said that there's going to be a tremendous amount of enthusiasm among these medical centers. And it's a lot of them still, 1,700 medical centers. There's going to be tremendous enthusiasm and incentive for them to get these IIT trials launched and to do them at the level of quality and rigor that's going to be required to get approval for routine therapeutic use. So the people I spoke with said that they think that there's going to be an acceleration both in the speed and in the throughput as a result of this. And and this is going to add speed to a process that's already, faster than what happens in anywhere else in the world.
Which is kind of insane. That's really what stood out to me when I read your piece, talking about a government committee turning around an application in like 20 days is pretty fast.
Yeah, so that's I should have mentioned that. So there's very strict and very ambitious timelines for the whole process. And at the end of it, after a medical center has completed an IIT and believes that it's ready to be transitioned to routine therapeutic use, they submit it to a national authority, which has a total of 20 working days to provide an answer, a yes or no answer. And then there's going to be the same kind of post-market or post-approval follow-up that you would expect for any gene and cell therapy. And there will be the possibility that approvals could be modified or withdrawn based on data that's collected after they go into routine use.
The one upshot that you mentioned is this ability to get therapies into routine clinical use this fast is really going to reduce the cycle time for iterative improvements in therapies and in the technology for manufacturing.
Yeah, I think so. And I think especially if you look at something like CAR T therapies that are already having big impacts around the world, but they're not optimized by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that the ability of many, many medical centers in China to launch CAR T therapies and similar kinds of therapies, to start charging for them, to learn from their experience, to do new trials, and to modify the therapies and to modify the way that they're manufactured quickly is going to have a big impact on moving the whole field forward.
What do you think the likely impact on Western drug developers and investors might be?
Well, I think you're going to see Western companies. It wouldn't surprise me if you see Western companies looking to partner with Chinese institutions, Chinese biotech companies, Chinese medical centers in an effort to get proof of concept data on therapies quickly. I think you're going to start seeing more Western companies acquiring assets from China that have been de-risked, at least to some extent, because there's high quality human data that's available that makes them more comfortable launching, investing in and launching a more traditional clinical development program outside of China.
All right. Well, Steve's story is out now on biocentury.com. It is going to be very interesting to watch how this unfolds. Okay, catalysts. First up will be Selena's story. The Catalyst package, we kick off every year with it, with the editorial staff led by Selena and Lauren Martz, coming up with the milestones in various indications that they believe will move the needle for biotech and pharma. Selena, you have you're a little bit cross-eyed, I can tell you. You've just sent me this massive deck to edit. What stood out to you among the various catalysts in neurology? What milestones are you looking out for this year?
Well, the good news, Jeff, there's a lot of them. It is a really
that
big
is
slide
great
deck.
for neuro.
Yeah. So people should, if they're interested, go in there, spend some time. Maybe we'll take it in parts. So in psychiatry, where disease biology is still poorly understood, where the animal models are terrible, everybody acknowledge, there's still a lot of really interesting things going on. Okay, let's start with psychedelics. There was obviously the first program from Lykos, formerly MAPS, did not make it. But this year we'll have phase 3 data coming from 3 programs in depression and 1 in anxiety. And these programs have been producing really big effect sizes in their earlier trials. And, as I go about and talk to neuroscience companies at JP Morgan and other places, I ask about this field. And there's just a lot of people out there who think, yeah, one of these companies is definitely going to make it. Like, we're going to have a psychedelic on the market in the next few years. So this is an area to watch. I think the big questions have always been, can you really know what the effect size is, given that there's functional unblinding, right? People understand which group they're in for the most part, whether they've gotten placebo or not, because these are powerfully mind-altering drugs. And the answer there seems to be, well, if the really large effect sizes that we've seen in phase 2 carry through into phase 3, then even if some expectation bias is contributing, some placebo effect is contributing, it probably won't explain all of the effect, right? So people are hoping for really big effect sizes. That's going to be important. The other thing that's going to be important is durability of these treatment effects.
I'll just jump in there and say, this, I think, is one area that's going to benefit from the new leadership at FDA and the new leadership at HHS. There's a great deal of enthusiasm for psychedelics, and I would say even impatience for FDA to approve psychedelics, coming from Secretary Kennedy, coming from Commissioner McCary. So I think that the things, the kind of doubts or the things in the past might have been impediments or speed bumps to getting things approved are likely to be easier to overcome now than they were in the past.
That's right. And one of the debates in this field is whether you need the psychoactive, the trip part of the psychedelics for the efficacy. We're not going to get an answer on that this year. All these phase 3 companies are kind of, even if they have synthetic versions, analogs, it's basically psilocybin, LSD, the classic psychedelics, which have the trip. So that's a future question to be answered, not a this year one. But if things go well and they make it on the market, I think one of the big questions just for the industry is, what is the care pathway going to look like? What are the payment models going to look like? Because these require in-clinic administration and 6+ hours of monitoring afterward. It's a full day. It uses a lot of hospital resources. And so these companies, Compass, Cybin, and the likes, are working on solutions to those problems. And then behind them in phase 2, there's AbbVie, who had the Gilgamesh deal, which was kind of a big deal in neuropsych last year. They have a synthetic version that's meant to be just a lot more consistent from patient to patient in terms of how long it lasts, and it's much shorter. So they're hoping to make some progress there. And then further behind are companies who are trying to like get rid of the trip aspect altogether. But that's going to be a little while.
How about outside of the psychedelic space?
So we have so a really interesting area to watch over the long term will be precision psychiatry, precision medicine in the sense of selecting patients. This is still very nascent, but some of the leaders there, like Alto Neuroscience, have proof of concept, phase 2 and phase 1B readouts coming this year, where they're using, say, EEG or cognitive testing, some objective measurement that makes sense with the mechanism of action of the drug that can help find responsive patients, because everybody knows depression, schizophrenia, these big psychiatric indications probably are not one indication, and there's not going to be one thing that really moves the needle for patients. So I'm excited to see, the progress that gets made there.
And you think there's going to be catalysts this year? We're going to have some.
Yeah, they're not like
idea.
they're not the late stage like phase 3, but there's proof of concept catalysts coming. So 3 of them are coming from Alto Neuroscience, 2 in depression, 1 in schizophrenia. But it's not the only company. There is one that's looking at like a thyroid pathway mechanism, and they have a genetic test for that. It's this company called MNC. It's partnered with Spruce. So companion diagnostic for that one, also phase 2, first half this year.
Are there any particular companies that you're excited about for this year that have a lot of things going on?
Yeah, I mean, I think one company with breakout story potential is Praxis Precision Medicines. It had promising data last year, both in essential tremor, which is an area of definitely big unmet need, and in a rare developmental epilepsy condition. And it will have more data this year. In fact, if all goes well for that company, for its lead program in essential tremor, it could submit to FDA and even get an approval by year end. So that company might be on the cusp of transitioning to a commercial stage and may even have more than one drug on its hands in the field of neuroscience. So that's one to watch.
I'll just throw one other thing in here, which is when we're looking at catalysts and thinking about the year ahead, it's going to be scrambled up compared to previous years by the Commissioner National Priority Voucher Program, which is likely to cause some things to jump ahead of the queue, to jump ahead of where you ordinarily, the timelines that you would ordinarily think about. And I think, like we talked about last week also, that's also probably going to have a knock-on effect, which is that other things are likely to be slowed because there are limited resources at FDA. And if they're prioritizing one thing, they're likely to deprioritize other things.
And if I could just I don't want to ignore neurodegeneration altogether before we move on. I don't want to suggest that nothing's going on there. There's a lot of interesting stuff going on, because that's an area where human genetics have been very productive at pointing to targets where you can, have some high conviction around them. And we're going to see rare readouts that I think are going to be really interesting. There's proof of concept coming for a group of therapies for a rare form of frontotemporal dementia, which is driven by granulin mutations across a couple of different modalities. There's more Huntington's disease data coming. And then, I think in Alzheimer's, well, everybody wants to know if these amyloid targeting molecules are going to be more effective if you give them to people before they have symptoms. That's not a 2026 story. That's a little further down the road. But there is at least one important readout from like the classic mechanisms, tau and amyloid this year. I wouldn't say it's make or break, because these things never break. But in the tau field, Biogen has data coming, phase 2 data coming from BIIB080, which is important because it's an antisense molecule that just knocks down tau at the mRNA level. So all forms of tau. Tau is a very complicated protein with lots of different splice variants, combinations of phosphorylation, and whatnot, lots of proteoforms. It's also an intracellular protein, but it has some extracellular pathology as well, right? And so like exactly how to target it is just not an easy question to answer. And so this mechanism just turns off the faucet that spits out new tau. And so it can, in theory, kind of take down all of these various forms and test the hypothesis very broadly. And so people will be watching for that to see if this target or if this protein tau that we know is involved in Alzheimer's can in fact be a target for a drug, right? Because that's very much still not understood.
Well, there's a lot here to digest. The slide format, I think, really helps. Some cool pictures to go along with it to help you understand the mechanisms. Yeah, Selena didn't leave much on the table. There's MS readouts she's tracking. We're looking for a third win for Roche's BTK, which could lead to regulatory submissions and just a lot more. So looking forward to our readers being able to get their hands on this. It will be out this week, along with stories from Lauren and, of course, Stephen Hansen writing about obesity milestones, tracking the new orals. And I believe he says there's a lot of other data that will keep investors interested. Okay, let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back to Danielle, who leads our Emerging Company Profile series.
BioCentury this week is brought to you by the 5th East-West Biopharma Summit in South Korea. An arc of innovation is emerging across Asia, and Western biopharma leaders are taking note, from cross-border deals to Newcos. In March 2026, the 5th BioCentury Bay Helix East-West Biopharma Summit visits South Korea for the first time. Meet the biopharma leaders putting Korea innovation on the global map. Learn why Korea has become a clinical trial and manufacturing hub. Discover if Korea is the next hotspot for Newco formation. Plus meet biopharma innovators from India to Singapore to China and Japan. Register now at biocenturyeastwest.com.
Okay, Danielle, thanks for joining us again this week.
Happy to be here.
Awesome. Danielle heads up our Emerging Company Profile series, which has gotten re-energized lately with the addition of a couple of new staff members joining Danielle and writing about hot new companies. Tierney Baum and Lindsay Martin have both been writing up a storm. And Danielle, where do you want to start? We've got one that you want to talk about that you wrote and one that Tierney wrote.
That's right. Yeah, these actually fit in really well with what Selena was just talking about. So non-hallucinogenic neuropsych medicines and then better models for CNS drug discovery. So we can start with the former. So a French startup called Elkadonia, and the name actually gives you a big clue into their target of interest, ELK1, and what they're going after, anhedonia. So that's the inability to feel pleasure in a core symptom of depression.
Tell us about ELK1. There's a new one on me.
Yeah, it it hasn't slipped, your mind. It's actually a new target. We don't have any other products for it in BCIQ, so this would be a potential first in class. ELK1 is a transcription factor, and it's activated by ERK. Elkadonia's compound inhibits this activation by interrupting the PPI, the protein-protein interaction between those two. And then that downstream, that leads to modulating gene expression involved in neuroplasticity. And the CEO, Delphine Charvin, actually said that it turns off genes involved in inflammation, which is sort of a new axis being discovered as important in depression.
Yeah, excellent. The investor. I mean, this is a pretty early stage company. They're using a seed round that they raised last year, I believe.
Yeah.
To identify a small molecule drug candidate.
Right.
Kerma, along with We Life Sciences and the French Tech Seed Fund, which is a government fund, part of BPI France. So certainly some savvy investors backing this. Anything else to say about the tech, Danielle?
Yeah, I think this, to highlight some of the unique points, is that ELK1 is intracellular. So this is in neurons, highly expressed in the hippocampus and nucleus accumbens, which are important regions for memory, context, and reward. So that's the context for like the depression connection. But this is in contrast to most classical antidepressants, which are acting extracellular on, transporters and monoamine neurotransmitters at the synapse, like just keeping the transmitter in the synapse for a longer amount of time. But it's not really modulating gene expression downstream. So this could be a more durable potentially treatment for depression. And as the CEO, Delphine, said to us that the ultimate goal for the company is to make depression an acute condition and not a chronic one anymore.
How does it compare with ketamine?
Right. So ketamine, they said it's similar as in it's fast acting. So that's like a great part about ketamine. You go in the clinic, you get it, and you feel better almost instantly. But it does have some of those, as Selena was mentioning, like mind altering, aspects. And so you do have to stay in the clinic and be monitored for several hours. And this molecule would not have that aspect.
Excellent. Well, the company plans to raise a Series A after it identifies that lead compound. And the company is headquartered in Strasbourg. Probably saying that wildly wrong. We also had Bexorg. This is a Yale spinout that Tierney wrote about in December. It's a company that's rethinking CNS drug discovery. How's it doing that, Danielle?
Yeah, they're using whole human brains, which is kind of wild. They're really trying to solve the problem that CNS therapies fail at far higher rates than drugs for other organ systems. This comes back to Selena's point about how we know the CNS models are just not great. The company's thesis is that cultured tissues, lack the complexity of a living human brain, and then the animal models just don't predict clinical outcomes. So what better model than just use the human brain itself? No big deal.
Well,
no big deal.
It does sound like a big deal. So one thing you said, living brains, but we're not really talking about living brains that are in living people, right?
Might have some ethical issues there.
Yeah, right. So these are donated post-mortem brains, and the company is keeping them molecularly active, but they're not functionally active still. They're not firing, the neurons are not firing, but the cells are alive. And so this whole idea started almost a decade ago when Bexor's co-founder and CEO, Zvonimir Verselya, was working in a lab at Yale as a postdoc. And you might have remembered this headline: the group revived brain activity in pigs hours after they died. I remember this. I was in grad school, and what a fun lunch conversation with my colleagues, right? In grad school. The pig is, revived. So it was based on it's hemoglobin based, and it's a cytoprotective perfusion platform. So they're maintaining brain circulation at normal body temperature, and that's really the key aspects. It's preventing cellular death. So it's keeping it molecularly active for a few hours. But again, there's no functional activity.
So you have a brain that's molecularly active for a few hours.
Right.
And you can do something to perturb it, and then you can get some kind of a readout. How do you do that? What's the input to it? And then what's the readout from it?
Yeah. So the input could be drug perturbations, right? You put a drug on and see what changes. And they say they have multi-scale data from tissue, plasma, CSF, so that's cerebral spinal fluid. And this is spatial and temporal responses. And they've even had some experience with postmortem brains with neurodegenerative diseases, Alzheimer's, ALS, FTD. And when you put the drug on, you can get PK, biodistribution. You can see if it penetrates the blood-brain barrier. So just a lot about de-risking, what the drug's going to act like in the clinic is basically their big thesis. They have $42.5 million in total financing.
But can't tell you if it modulates synaptic transmission or plasticity, because those things are not active.
True. There are limitations here.
Yeah.
And then how's it going to work? They're providing this as a service for other companies? Are they going to use this as a platform for developing their own drugs?
So they told us, for the ECP, that they have a 3-track strategy. Near term is collaborations with pharma and biotech companies. So they had a June partnership with Biohaven to advance 2 of their preclinical programs. Then they're going to complete what they're calling a brain native AI model in the medium term, and then eventually plan to develop an internal pipeline.
Yep. They have a presence in New Haven, not surprising, but also out in my neck of the woods and Selena's neck of the woods, San Francisco. Another good company to watch, and keep a lookout for the next companies in our emerging profile series. Thanks for that, Danielle. And thanks to Selena and Steve for joining as well. And thank you to you for tuning in. If you like what you're hearing, subscribe, follow, like, all those terms that you hear. Shout out to Kendall Square Orchestra, which creates the music for BioCentury's podcasts. We'll catch you next week.